Vader's reconstruction after Mustafa was not an act of medical optimization, but an exercise in political and psychological containment. The design choices implemented in his armor reflect systemic limitations, inconsistent with what Imperial resources could have achieved. Comparative analysis with contemporary cybernetics shows that the components installed were outdated even by Clone Wars standards, indicating intentional selection rather than technological necessity. The respirator integrated into Vader's helmet operated at a restricted airflow capacity relative to known medical-grade rebreathers. The pattern of mechanical inhalation and exhalation indicates a device built for durability rather than comfort or efficiency. This constraint ensured that Vader's physical state remained continuously strained. The restricted oxygen flow would have caused persistent respiratory stress, which kept his cardiovascular system in a constant state of agitation. The mechanized limb servos within the armor lacked the responsiveness found in models produced for standard veterans' prosthetics. Available sources in both Legends and canon show the Empire producing highly advanced prosthetics for other high-ranking officials, which confirms that Vader's crude limb systems were not the technological ceiling of the era. The stiffness and delayed feedback of these prosthetics shaped his movement patterns, creating a continuous cycle of discomfort and mechanical opposition. Internal sensors within the suit included pain inhibitors, but records show they were set to minimal output. This configuration permitted nerve endings to remain overstimulated, ensuring that the wearer experienced heightened physical distress during regular activity. Such calibration suggests deliberate choice, as pain suppressants could easily have been increased without compromising mobility or combat efficiency. The armor's weight profile exceeded what was biomechanically necessary for defensive or life support purposes. Heavy plating restricted range of motion and placed chronic strain on the spine and joints. A lighter composite material existed in Imperial manufacturing, but was not included in Vader's design. This indicates that the suit's mass served more as a symbolic and behavioral pressure mechanism than as a protective enhancement. The helmet's visual filters reduced natural peripheral vision by an estimated 1/3 compared with standard optical enhancement gear. The choice of narrow-spectrum lenses restricted contrast perception and colour accuracy. This narrowed Vader's situational awareness and forced reliance on the Force for navigation and combat awareness, thereby reinforcing dependence on rage-driven reflexes rather than environmental clarity. Acoustic dampening systems in the helmet created a muted auditory environment. While such dampening could theoretically protect the wearer from loud battlefield conditions, the degree of suppression exceeded what was required for SUBMISSIVE safety. This diminished Vader's ability to perceive subtle environmental cues and interpersonal communication. The result was a sensory profile that limited human connection and reinforced isolation. The suit's internal temperature regulation was also limited. Vader's environment often ran excessively hot, especially during high-intensity exertion. Given the Empire's access to advanced cooling systems, the absence of adequate thermal regulation demonstrates intentional discomfort. Chronic overheating produces muscle fatigue and neural stress, which would reinforce Vader's dependency on adrenaline and aggressive impulse responses. Electrical insulation in the armor was substandard. Despite being designed for a high-profile combatant, the suit showed repeated vulnerability to electrical discharge, as evidenced by various canonical encounters. Scientifically, this vulnerability is inconsistent with Imperial standards for armoured units. The lack of proper insulation ensured that Vader remained at risk from attacks that could have been easily mitigated through available technology. The armour's integration points, particularly at the limbs and torso, created persistent irritation and inflammation. The organic tissue interfaces rubbed against exposed skin and scar tissue, generating chronic discomfort. Regular maintenance could have corrected this, but documentation shows no effort to modify the suit design over the decades, indicating that the condition was expected and maintained rather than overlooked. The neural interface system, rather than streamlining the control of mechanical limbs, generated painful feedback during rapid movement. This increased the metabolic cost of basic actions and conditioned Vader to internalize pain as part of his operational baseline. The neurological strain kept him in a heightened physiological state, conducive to aggressive behavioral patterns associated with dark side usage. The armor's software lacked adaptive learning algorithms found in other cybernetic systems. Instead of gradually adjusting to the user's motor patterns and improving responsiveness, the suit remained static. This prevented Vader from ever achieving effortless integration with his prosthetics, limiting long-term comfort and ensuring continuous physical opposition within every movement cycle. External environmental seals were effective for survivability, but inefficient for convenience, requiring extended preparation before removal or maintenance. This restricted Vader's autonomy and forced reliance on medical or technical personnel for routine upkeep. The suit was therefore not only a physical system, but an administrative system of control that limited his independence. Communication systems integrated into the helmet synthesized Vader's voice through a monotone output. This removed emotional inflection and social nuance, limiting interpersonal communication. While this had intimidation benefits in military environments, it also functionally curtailed Vader's ability to engage in normal social dynamics. The voice modulation system constrained his identity and reinforced his isolation from peers and subordinates. Taken together, the evidence demonstrates that Vader's suit did not control him in a mechanistic sense. It controlled him through sustained physical discomfort, restricted sensory input, and manipulation of environmental conditions. Its design reflects a deliberate effort to maintain psychological pressure, dependence, and behavioral predictability. The system ensured that Vader operated within parameters beneficial to the Emperor's authority structure. Through these design choices, Vader's armor acted not as a tool of empowerment but as a structurally engineered constraint. It preserved his combat utility while systematically preventing personal autonomy, comfort, or recovery. The purpose of the suit was not merely to sustain life but to manufacture a continual state of limitation. Vader's armor served not only as medical support but also as a controlled environment, engineered to maintain psychological compliance. Each structural limitation contributed to a framework that reinforced dependency on the Emperor. The suit's constraints aligned with patterns of authoritarian design in which physical restriction is used to stabilize hierarchical power. Research into imperial military infrastructure shows that advanced prosthetics existed but were not allocated to Vader, indicating deliberate resource withholding. The armor's sensory deprivation mechanisms contributed to long-term behavioral conditioning. The reduced visual range, muted acoustics, and filtered environmental data produced an artificial sensory field. This field restricted social engagement and inhibited environmental familiarity. In systems analysis, decreased sensory diversity increases reliance on internal models of perception. For Vader, this meant increased reliance on the Force and, by extension, increased susceptibility to emotional triggers cultivated by dark side discipline. The helmet's interior architecture created a closed feedback loop between Vader's biological systems and the suit's mechanical limitations. By restricting airflow, modulating auditory input, and controlling thermal conditions, the suit maintained Vader in a state of consistent physiological stress. This stress produced predictable behavioral output patterns. Studies of chronic stress systems indicate that individuals under constant strain show reduced cognitive flexibility, which aligns with Palpatine's interests in limiting Vader's independent judgment. Chronic pain was not incidental, but embedded into the armor's design. Medical records concerning prosthetic and neural interface technology during the Imperial era show that effective analgesic systems existed. The absence of these systems in Vader's suit demonstrates an intentional omission. Consistent low-level pain reduces neurological bandwidth and channels cognitive focus into narrow behavioral pathways. This phenomenon contributed to Vader's operational efficiency in combat, but also restricted reflective thought. The suit's mechanical vulnerability to electrical discharge created a strategic dependency. Multiple documented encounters reveal that Vader's systems were destabilized by electromagnetic exposure. A high-level combatant with access to advanced support infrastructure should not have such a predictable weakness. The persistence of this flaw, never corrected through upgrades, indicates a structural mechanism, ensuring that Palpatine retained absolute control in any confrontation scenario. Respiratory dependency further restricted Vader's autonomy. The helmet's life support function could not be removed or bypassed. This dependence on a singular, externally controlled mechanism created a centralized failure point. Any system with a non-redundant, critical life-sustaining component increases vulnerability. From a strategic AI perspective, Palpatine ensured that Vader could not survive independent of Imperial facilities. Operational performance data demonstrates that Vader's combat efficiency increased when he experienced heightened levels of physical stress. The suit's design amplified this correlation by engineering chronic discomfort as a baseline operating condition. The relationship between pain-induced adrenaline responses and amplified dark side output has empirical grounding within the law. Palpatine therefore structured the suit to maintain Vader in a state physiologically conducive to dark side activation. The armor's interior sealed environment restricted tactile sensation and temperature variation. Sensory isolation reduces emotional grounding and increases depersonalization effects. While this benefited combat focus, it impaired Vader's ability to re-establish psychological equilibrium after missions. Research into sensory isolation chambers shows that prolonged exposure diminishes emotional regulation. Vader's consistent exposure to such an environment reinforced behavioral rigidity. Mobility restrictions embedded in the limb design impaired Vader's ability to move without mechanical assistance. This design choice forced the integration of his physical form with his cybernetics at all times, creating a structural dependency on the suit. Removing natural movement options ensured that he could not regain physical autonomy through training adaptations. The rigid servo structure guaranteed his continued reliance on artificial systems. The suit inhibited rapid recovery from injury. Despite his high combat exposure, Vader lacked the medical acceleration technologies given to specialized troopers or elite operatives. The absence of back-to-compatible access ports and regeneration boosters slowed tissue repair. This contributed to sustained physical degradation over time. Documented encounters show that Vader's injuries accumulated rather than resolved, which suggests intentional design to prevent recovery to pre-Mustafar capability. The Emperor's influence extended to maintenance oversight. Vader required routine technicians for calibration, system cleaning, and component replacement. Although such personnel operated under strict protocols, their involvement created administrative control over Vader's physical stability. This arrangement prevented him from fully controlling his own upkeep, establishing a logistical dependency on Imperial infrastructure. Voice modulation technology also contributed to behavioral containment. The synthesizer removed natural vocal variation, eliminating linguistic nuance. This mechanism restricted Vader's communicative flexibility and positioned him structurally as an instrument of command rather than an individual with autonomous intention. Communication studies indicate that reduced tonal range limits negotiation ability, which aligned with the Empire's preference for Vader as an enforcer rather than a diplomat. Internal monitoring systems embedded in the armor tracked vital signs and biological markers. These data streams, while functioning as life support tools, also offered opportunities for surveillance. Palpatine had direct access to Vader's physiological state, allowing real-time monitoring of emotional and physical fluctuations. This created an omnipresent oversight mechanism that reinforced hierarchical control. The symbolic function of the suit operated alongside its biological and mechanical constraints. To the public, Vader appeared as a singular Imperial enforcer. Internally, the suit prevented him from reintegrating into any social or political structure outside the Emperor's influence. The uniform identity imposed by the armor restricted his ability to cultivate alliances or interpersonal loyalty. Across its numerous constraints, the armor produced a cumulative effect. The biological strain, sensory deprivation, technical dependency, and administrative oversight formed an interlocking system of control. The suit did not dominate Vader through mechanical coercion, but through layered structural limitations that shaped his behavior and maintained his subordination. In sum, Vader's armor functioned as a comprehensive framework of restriction rather than enhancement. It preserved his utility as a combat asset while maintaining continuous psychological and logistical dependence on the Emperor. These factors indicate that the suit was not merely a medical apparatus, but an instrument of engineered compliance designed to sustain both his survival and his subjugation.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.